The ocean has a way of keeping secrets and almost never giving them back. In 1998, a 23-year-old woman vanished from a cruise ship without a trace, vibrant, full of life, with her future just beginning. Her name was Amy Lynn Bradley, and what followed her disappearance still unsettles even seasoned investigators to this day. But the deeper you go into this case, the more disturbing the questions become. Why did her parents begin receiving strange, unsettling messages years later? Who was the man seen walking with her at dawn? And why did the FBI keep running into dead ends? Amy's story never truly ended. It lingers, somewhere between evidence, speculation, and silence. Before we go further, many people still write one phrase in the comments: justice for Amy. Her family never stopped searching, and maybe we shouldn't either. In March of 1998, the Bradley family boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas. It was supposed to be a simple vacation: sunshine, music, and time together. Amy, their 23-year-old daughter, had just graduated from college. A new job was waiting for her back home. This trip was meant to be a pause before life truly began. The ship departed from San Juan, heading into the Caribbean. On board, everything felt alive: tropical rhythms, laughter, late nights, warm air. But Amy wasn't just another tourist. She was athletic, confident, a strong swimmer. She had played college basketball. Her brother Brad later described her as adventurous, but also grounded, someone who always stayed aware of her surroundings. And yet, something felt off. Even early in the cruise, her parents began to notice it. Not about Amy, about the way people looked at her. Her mother noticed it first. The looks weren't friendly. They lingered too long, studying, watching. There was something unsettling about it, something that didn't feel right. On the night of March 23rd, the family attended a formal dinner on board. Amy wore a black top and a white skirt. She looked radiant, relaxed, completely unaware of what was coming. After dinner, she and her brother went to the ship's nightclub. Music, dancing, a normal night. It would be the last time anyone saw her safe. Brad later recalled that Amy had been dancing with members of the ship's band. One of them stood out, a bass player known as Yellow. They seemed friendly, nothing unusual. At least, not at the time. Around 3:30 a.m., they returned to their cabin. Brad fell asleep almost immediately. Amy was still there, alive, present, real. By 6 a.m., she was gone. Her father, Ron Bradley, woke up and noticed something was wrong. Her bed was empty, but her belongings were still there. Her sandals, her cigarettes, her ID. She hadn't prepared to leave. She hadn't planned anything. And yet, she was gone. Panic set in almost instantly. The family began searching the ship. Hallways, decks, common areas. She hadn't disembarked. She wasn't by the pool. She wasn't in any of the restaurants. She wasn't anywhere. The crew initiated a search, but it felt casual, controlled, distant. They said she was an adult. Maybe she had just wandered off. But time was passing, and the unease was turning into fear. Then came the first strange report. A passenger claimed to have seen Amy around 6 a.m. near an elevator. She wasn't alone. She was walking with a man. The description matched the same musician, Yellow. She didn't look afraid, but something about the timing was deeply unsettling. Why was she with him so early? Why hadn't she told her family? And why did no one see her after that? Even more concerning was the crew's response. They hesitated to announce her disappearance. They didn't want to alarm other passengers. But in cases like this, every minute matters. When her parents insisted something was wrong, the staff hesitated. They cited protocol, procedures, the need to avoid panic. And then came a decision that would later haunt this case. The ship did not stop. It did not turn back. It continued its route. For the next 24 hours, Amy's family begged the crew to seal the ship, to search every cabin, every corner, every deck. Instead, only limited areas were checked. Entertainment continued, music played, passengers relaxed, as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, any trace Amy may have left was disappearing with every passing hour, and it began to feel as though maintaining the guest experience mattered more than finding a missing. By the time Royal Caribbean finally contacted authorities, it was already too late. The most critical window, the first 24 to 48 hours, had been lost. And in cases like this, that window is everything. It's when trails are fresh, when witnesses remember clearly, when movement can still be tracked. But for Amy, that window slipped away, and almost immediately, disturbing reports began to surface. Just days after her disappearance, a taxi driver on Curaçao came forward with a story he couldn't shake. He said a young woman had rushed toward his car in a state of panic. She asked for a phone. She looked terrified, constantly glancing over her shoulder, as if someone was watching her. Then everything changed. Two men approached, and in that instant, the woman went silent. No screaming, no struggle. They simply walked her away. At the time, the driver didn't report it. He assumed it was a domestic argument, a private situation, something he didn't want to get involved in. But later, when he saw Amy Bradley's face on television, he froze. He was certain it was her, and that raised a terrifying possibility. If it really was Amy, then she had made it off the ship, which meant she may have been taken before anyone even realized she was missing. That would require speed, coordination, and possibly assistance. Back in the United States, the Bradley family clung to every lead, every tip, every sighting, every fragment of hope. But none of it could be confirmed, and that uncertainty became its own form of torture. Then came another report, one that pushed the case into something far darker. In 1999, a U.S. Navy officer came forward with a story he had kept to himself. He had been on shore leave and entered a brothel on Curaçao. There, a woman approached him. She spoke in English, and what she said was chilling. "My name is Amy Bradley. I need help." The officer later admitted he froze. He didn't immediately understand what was happening. But before he could respond, two men appeared and took her away. Quickly, firmly, without hesitation. He didn't report the incident right away. He feared consequences, for where he had been, for what it might mean. But months later, after seeing Amy's case, he came forward. By then, the woman was gone. For the Bradley family, this was devastating, but also hope. If it was really Amy, then she was alive. But in what condition? Under whose control? Over time, more sightings began to emerge. Women resembling Amy were reported in multiple Caribbean locations. Some accounts were brief, others more detailed. One of the most talked about leads involved a photograph found on an escort website. The image showed a woman who looked strikingly similar to Amy. But it wasn't just her face, it was the tattoos. The matches were too precise to ignore. In 2005, things escalated further. The Bradley family received an anonymous email. Inside were photos. A woman, alive, but visibly exhausted. She was lying on a bed in what appeared to be a hotel room. Her eyes looked hollow, drained, as if something inside her had already broken. But what sent chills through the family was not just her expression. It was the details. The tattoos matched. The Tasmanian devil on her shoulder, the gecko on her stomach. Even investigators acknowledged it. The resemblance to Amy was undeniable. The Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the woman in the images could be her. But the trail went nowhere. The photos had originated from a Caribbean adult website, and then they vanished, removed before they could be traced, as if someone didn't want them found. And that raised another question. Who sent them? Was it someone trying to help? A cruel manipulation? Or was it the only way Amy could reach out? At this point, investigators began leaning toward a far more disturbing theory. Not an accident, not a voluntary disappearance, but abduction, more specifically, human trafficking. Several elements pointed in that direction: the brothel sighting, the escort website images, repeated reports across multiple islands, and the silence of people who may have known more than they said. But there was still no hard proof, and that made it even more unsettling. Meanwhile, Royal Caribbean remained largely silent. Public pressure grew, but official statements remained minimal, controlled. Some believed they were protecting their reputation. Others believed something on board had been overlooked or hidden. And then, a darker possibility emerged. What if Amy had been targeted before the cruise even began? What if someone on that ship had already chosen her? As the family continued pushing for answers, one name kept resurfacing: Yellow. The musician from the band Blue Orchid, the man seen with Amy the night she disappeared. Witnesses said he gave her unusual attention. Some dismissed it as harmless. Others weren't so sure. There were rumors he invited her to meet later. Nothing was ever confirmed. But when questioned, his statements were vague. Too vague. He didn't provide clear answers. And more importantly, he left the ship before giving a full, detailed account. Why? If he was one of the last people to see her, why didn't he come forward more openly? The Bradley family pushed investigators to look deeper, but instead of clarity, the timeline became even more fragmented. And the deeper this case went, the clearer one thing became: something didn't add up. One of the most heavily criticized aspects of Amy's case wasn't just the lack of evidence. It was time. More precisely, how it was lost. When Amy didn't show up for breakfast, her parents immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't like her. She hadn't left a note, hadn't taken her belongings, hadn't said a word. But the response from ship security was distant, dismissive. They suggested she had probably gone ashore early. A routine explanation. A convenient one. But it didn't make sense. Amy had left behind her shoes, her ID, everything. She hadn't prepared to leave. And still, no urgency followed. Hours passed before any serious action was taken. By then, the ship had already docked in Curaçao. If Amy had been taken off the ship, those hours were everything, and they were gone. Her parents asked the questions anyone would ask. Why weren't the exits sealed? Why wasn't her disappearance announced immediately? Why wasn't every passenger checked? There were no real answers, only explanations. And as investigators later revisited the timeline, the gaps became harder to ignore. Too many assumptions, too many delays, too much silence. But Amy's case wasn't isolated. Since the early 1990s, dozens of people have vanished from cruise ships, without witnesses, without evidence, without closure. The ocean absorbs more than just water. It absorbs truth. And jurisdiction only complicates it further. Who has authority? The country where the ship is registered? The country it departed from? Or the country where it docked? By the time those questions are resolved, time is already lost. Cruise lines often conduct their own internal investigations, and for the Bradley family, that became a major point of concern. They felt shut out. They were given general updates, but not the full passenger list, not full access to surveillance footage, not transparency. And that left them with a deeper question. What if more was being hidden than just procedural failure? Years later, a new account brought the case back into focus. In 2005, a woman named Judy Moore contacted the family. She claimed she had encountered a young woman in a hotel bathroom somewhere in the Caribbean. The woman appeared distressed, shaken, afraid. And then she said something that would haunt the case. "I'm Amy Bradley. Please help me." Before Judy could react, two men entered and took her away. It wasn't a vague resemblance. It was a direct plea. But once again, too late. By the time the report was followed up, the trail had vanished. Why didn't anyone intervene sooner? Why did she disappear again? The same pattern kept repeating. Amy seemed to reappear, only to vanish again. Just out of reach, every time. Meanwhile, Royal Caribbean reportedly offered the Bradley family a private settlement. The details were never publicly disclosed. But the family believed one thing: the company knew more than it admitted. Certain operational records from that day were never released. Internal logs, staff interviews, security details, all of it remained inaccessible. The Federal Bureau of Investigation continued its investigation, but even federal agents began encountering repeated dead ends. Witnesses disappeared, leads went cold, information lacked precision, and slowly, a difficult realization began to form. Official systems might not be enough. But the family refused to stop. That's when a private investigator entered the case. Desperate for answers, the Bradleys hired a specialist experienced in missing persons cases across the Caribbean. He worked differently. No bureaucracy, no waiting, no limitations. And almost immediately, he began uncovering things others hadn't. Unofficial reports, whispers, accounts from people unwilling to speak publicly. Multiple sources claimed they had seen a woman matching Amy's description across different islands. But one location kept repeating: Curaçao. One informant claimed he had seen her in a brothel on the same island where the ship had docked the morning she vanished. The coincidence was impossible to ignore, and it raised the question no one wanted to answer. If it was really Amy, why hadn't she escaped? The answer that began to surface was deeply disturbing. The investigator noticed a pattern: young women disappearing around cruise ports. Many never found. Some later linked to trafficking networks. And suddenly, the theory stopped sounding like speculation. It started looking like a system. More sightings followed: Barbados, Venezuela, Colombia. Different places, same description, the same tattoos, the same physical features. The matches were too precise. Could Amy have been trapped inside a network too powerful to confront? Then came another witness, a former U.S. Navy officer. In 1999, while on leave, he entered a brothel in Barbados. A woman approached him. She leaned in and whispered, "My name is Amy Bradley. I need help." He froze. Before he could react, she was taken away. He didn't report it immediately. He doubted himself, thought it might be coincidence. But after seeing Amy's photo, he was certain. The FBI took the report seriously, but when they returned to investigate, there was nothing. No trace, no confirmation, just another lead that dissolved. Years passed, and the Bradley family found themselves in a state few can understand. They couldn't grieve. There was no body. They couldn't move on. There were too many signs she might still be alive. They were suspended, between hope and loss. Amy's brother Brad carried that weight the most. He had been the last one to see her. He later said that if he had woken up earlier, maybe things would have been different. But the past doesn't change, and the questions remain. Then, years later, another image surfaced, blurry, unclear, but enough to reopen everything. A woman. And some believed it was Amy. The photograph surfaced without warning, blurry, distorted, almost as if it had been intentionally degraded. And yet, through the imperfections, one thing stood out clearly enough: a face. The woman in the image was lying on what appeared to be a lounge chair or a bed. Her expression was heavy, drained, hollow. There was something in her eyes that went beyond exhaustion. It looked like years of fear. The image came from an escort website in the Caribbean. She was listed under the name Jazz. But to those who knew Amy, the resemblance was undeniable. The shape of her jaw, the structure of her eyes, the expression. Too many similarities to dismiss. Amy's parents were convinced. Even experts who reviewed the image acknowledged the resemblance was significant. But just like before, the trail disappeared. The website was taken down. The data was erased. The source vanished, as if someone had removed it deliberately. That was the moment the family understood something critical. If answers existed, they would have to be found where everything began. In 2005, Ron and Iva Bradley returned to Curaçao. But this time, not as tourists, as parents who refused to stop searching. They walked the same streets, spoke to locals, showed Amy's photo to anyone willing to look. And what they heard was unsettling. Some people claimed they had seen her. Not years ago, recently. But one encounter stood out above the rest. At a beach bar, a bartender said something that stopped them cold. "I haven't seen her lately, but she used to come in here." He described her as quiet, reserved, always watching the door, as if she was afraid or being watched. That statement revived a theory the family had tried to suppress. What if Amy wasn't just missing, but controlled, moved, watched, restricted? And that led to a question that became harder to ignore. If she was alive, why didn't she escape? The answer suggested by some sources was chilling. Women in trafficking networks are often threatened, told their families will be harmed if they try to run. And Amy, fiercely protective of her family, might have stayed silent to keep them safe. But how do you protect the people you've already been taken from? The family continued pushing for help, but they ran into something no one could easily overcome: jurisdiction. Amy was a U.S. citizen, but she disappeared in international waters and was possibly seen in multiple foreign countries. That meant U.S. authorities had limited power. Organizations like Interpol were involved, but most leads came too late or lacked enough detail. Without physical evidence, without precise locations, without consistent cooperation across borders, the case stalled again and again. It wasn't that no one cared, it was that no one could act fast enough. And meanwhile, there were growing fears that someone might be watching the Bradley family, tracking their efforts, monitoring their search. In 2008, another witness came forward, a Canadian tourist vacationing in Curaçao. She claimed she had spoken to a woman on the beach. The woman said her name was Amy, said she was from Virginia. She appeared extremely nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder, as if she wasn't supposed to be speaking. When asked if she needed help, she walked away, quickly. Again, a moment, a chance. Gone. By the time the family reached the location, there was no one there. That same year, the Federal Bureau of Investigation reopened the case with a new team. They revisited old witnesses, reanalyzed evidence, applied newer forensic methods. One retired agent later admitted, "This never felt like a simple disappearance. Too many anomalies, too many red flags, too many inconsistencies." And yet, even with new tools, they still lacked the one thing that mattered most: proof. No body, no confirmed location, no definitive evidence of life. And then, another revelation. A document. The Bradley family learned that Royal Caribbean had an internal report, a more detailed one. It allegedly included a precise timeline, staff interviews, surveillance access logs, but it had never been made public. Ron Bradley tried to obtain it through legal channels. He was denied. Even formal requests led nowhere. And that raised the question, why? Why keep these details hidden? What exactly did they show? In 2009, an anonymous source came forward, a former cruise line security officer. He claimed surveillance footage had been reviewed internally before being handed over to authorities. He also said he was instructed not to ask questions, not to focus on where Amy may have disappeared from. Even more disturbing, some camera footage was reportedly corrupted or missing. Coincidence or interference? If true, this wasn't just negligence. It suggested something darker. That same year, a major investigative TV program brought Amy's case back into public focus. The Bradley family shared everything: photos, timelines, memories, and once again, tips began pouring in. One claimed Amy had been seen in 2000 on a Caribbean island. She was with two men. She looked afraid, but didn't ask for help. Why? Fear? Control? Something else? The information was passed to authorities, and like so many leads before, it disappeared. No resolution, no confirmation, only more questions. Time kept moving, hope did not. By 2011, more than a decade had passed since Amy disappeared. The Bradley family was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Years of interviews, appeals, investigations, and false leads had taken their toll. And still, no answers. Eventually, they made a painful decision: to step back from the public eye. They had believed media attention would bring clarity. Instead, it often brought noise, rumors, false tips, cruel hoaxes. The tip line remained active. They were still waiting, still hoping. But something had changed. They no longer spoke only about Amy's life. They spoke about hope itself. And then, a letter arrived. No return address, no explanation. Just 3 words written inside. Still alive. Help. It felt unreal, almost like a voice reaching through time. A handwriting analyst suggested the writing resembled Amy's, but without a confirmed origin, it meant nothing legally. There were no coordinates, no demands, no instructions, just a message. Was it a cry for help, or the cruelest deception yet? By 2012, another shift occurred. The Federal Bureau of Investigation effectively stepped back from active investigation. The case wasn't closed, but it was no longer being actively pursued. No confirmed sightings, no suspects, no crime scene. The early urgency had faded, replaced by process. For the Bradley family, this was devastating. They had placed their last hope in federal action, and once again, they were on their own. Why step back when human trafficking had never been ruled out? Was this the limit of the system, or a case that had quietly been set aside? Around this time, a former US Navy intelligence analyst approached the family privately. He proposed a theory. Amy may have been taken to a private island. Across the Caribbean, there are islands that operate far outside typical oversight. Remote, difficult to access, difficult to search. If Amy had been taken to such a place, finding her would be nearly impossible. It sounded like speculation, but it fit too well with everything else. Still, the family didn't stop. They continued funding private efforts, quietly, without attention. Then, in 2016, another lead emerged. A travel agent reported seeing a promotional brochure, a standard tourist image. But in the background, there was a woman, walking along a beach, with 2 others beside her, not looking at the camera, but her appearance, once again, matched. The location appeared to be Curaçao, the same island. Could Amy have been there all along, in plain sight, among tourists, among ordinary life? And if so, was she free, or still controlled? Back in Virginia, time stood still in the Bradley home. Amy's room remained untouched. Posters, photographs, notebooks, everything preserved exactly as she left it. Not as a memorial, but as a place waiting for her return. But what happens to hope over time? Does it become strength, or something heavier? Amy's case took on a life of its own. Online forums, videos, podcasts. People debated theories. Some believed it was a cover-up. Others suggested she had chosen to disappear. But most agreed on one thing: something didn't fit. Experts who reviewed the case noted that Amy's behavior did not align with voluntary disappearance. She had plans for the next day, excursions scheduled, a close bond with her family. No signs of distress, no indication she intended to leave. A forensic psychologist summarized it simply: people who disappear voluntarily leave traces, journals, messages, signals. Amy left none, which led to a stark conclusion. If she didn't leave on her own, someone else made her disappear. Amy's disappearance didn't just leave questions behind. It exposed something deeper: a system. After her case gained attention, scrutiny toward the cruise industry intensified. people began asking difficult questions. How safe are cruise ships really? What protocols exist when someone goes missing? And who is held accountable when someone disappears at sea? In the late 1990s, many cruise lines were not required to immediately report disappearances to international databases. There were no unified standards, no real transparency. The Bradley family pushed for change, not just for Amy, but for everyone. Because the real question remained, were these gaps simply flaws, or did they allow something to be hidden? One of the most haunting accounts resurfaced again and again. A U.S. Navy officer. He claimed that in 2005, inside a Caribbean brothel, a woman approached him. She said her name was Amy Bradley, and she begged for help. Before he could act, she was taken away. Again, quickly, controlled, silent. When authorities followed up on the lead, hope returned. For a moment, it felt real. They traced the location, a known but discreet establishment, whispered about, rarely investigated. Everything aligned. The description, the timeline, the details. But when they arrived, there was nothing. The building had burned down, completely. Officially, it was called an accident, but too many things in this case had already been called accidents. No records, no employees, no evidence, as if the place had been erased. To Amy's family, it felt like something else. A cleanup. If Amy had been there, she was gone again, and once more, too late. Years later, another message reached the family. Anonymous, brief. It claimed that a woman matching Amy's description had been seen in Barbados. It mentioned a name, Jazz. The message suggested she was being held by a man, controlled, abused, but it couldn't be verified. The email came from a public internet cafe. No cameras, no trace. Another lead. Gone. But there was something deeply unsettling about it. The message included details that had never been made public. Specifics about Amy's tattoos, what she had been wearing. How did the sender know? Was it an insider? A witness? Or Amy herself? There was no way to know. Desperate, the family pushed further. They hired a private investigator with experience tracking international trafficking networks. He worked quietly, outside official channels. Months later, he returned with a file. Inside, witness accounts, field notes, sketches, and one image that changed everything. A compound, high walls, barbed wire, armed guards, a place people entered but didn't leave. Multiple sources claimed a woman matching Amy's description had been seen there. The investigator warned them. This was dangerous. But the family had already gone too far to stop. They had something they never had before, a location and a choice. Go back to authorities or act independently. They chose to act. A small team was assembled. Their mission? Observe. No contact, no confrontation, just confirm. What they found was deeply unsettling. Men with radios, vehicles with covered windows, women moving quietly, heads down. It didn't look random. It looked organized. But Amy wasn't there. Not yet. The team needed more time, more access. And then, silence. Their last message read, "We're close. Something's happening." Then nothing. Days passed. Weeks. No response. The team had vanished. Later, an off-the-record contact revealed something chilling. The compound had been cleared, just 2 days after surveillance was noticed. Empty. Gone. As if someone had been watching and reacting. The investigator resurfaced weeks later. Shaken. He refused to speak. Said only this: the risk was too high. For the Bradley family, the realization was unbearable. They had been close, closer than ever before. And still, it slipped away. Maybe forever. Years continued to pass. The world moved on. But they didn't. Amy was never just a memory. She was still waiting. Her face remained on posters. Her case stayed active in Interpol databases. Her name continued to surface. They spoke at events, raised awareness, fought for others like her. Because there are thousands of families still waiting, still searching, still unheard. But Amy's story became something more. a symbol. She didn't disappear in isolation. She disappeared in plain sight, surrounded by people, by cameras, by light. And that's what makes it so haunting. In their home in Virginia, her room remains untouched, not as a shrine, but as a promise that she will come back. Today, Amy Bradley's case remains open. No body, no charges, no final answer. Only fragments, sightings, shadows. From questionable decisions on the ship, to missing surveillance, to a burned-down brothel, to a vanished investigation team, every piece leads somewhere and nowhere. And that is what makes this case unforgettable. It's not just a disappearance. It's a reminder that someone can vanish in plain sight, that systems can fail, that truth can be close, but unreachable. No one has been held accountable. No definitive proof has ever surfaced. And yet, the story lives on, because people refuse to let it disappear. Amy was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and until the truth is known, her story remains unfinished. Her parents once said, "We still have hope. As long as Amy hasn't been found, there's a chance." And maybe that's what keeps this case alive. Every new safety law, every discussion, every video keeps that flame burning. Because one truth has become impossible to ignore. Silence cannot bury a story this deep. The world may never fully know what happened that night, but the search for answers is not over. Amy Bradley's story is not just about disappearance. It's about the questions that remain, the voices that refuse to fade. And maybe one day, the truth will finally surface. Until then, we remember Amy, not just for how she vanished, but for how her story still speaks.